So the coffee got made. um, yeah, I sort of like cut the previous video off abruptly because I was trying to really like collect my thoughts and figure out exactly what I wanted to say. Um, because this is a very a complicated issue, and the thing is, see, there are multiple levels. Think of it like focal distances. You can focus on something that's a mile away, and something that's 100 yards away, and something that's 3 feet away, and something that's right in front of your face. You have to figure out what focal length you're going to focus on. Mhm. Actually, that's like not the correct term, but it doesn't matter. The point that I wanted to make is that I wasn't, when I did the other video, I wasn't sure what exactly I wanted to talk about. And so now I've collected my thoughts a little bit, and now I know what I'm going to talk about. And this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the fact of the macro picture of all that's going on. Because let's start with a few premises that I think that we can all agree on. Those premises are that the Russians are winning, and they are going to win. It's inevitable. It's a time issue, and that the Russians are going to slowly keep on grinding away in the Donbass. Eventually, the Ukrainian armed force will all of a sudden collapse. They'll just collapse like a sandcastle. It'll just be that quick, and that's what happens historically, by the way. When an army that is losing just all of a sudden collectively loses its nerve, it just collapses, and the advancing army that had been fighting and dying for inches all of a sudden finds that it's just like an open highway and they can take over the whole thing. I think that that's essentially what's going to happen. I think that most intelligent observers of the situation would agree that that's what's going to happen. Once the nerve, the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian armed forces has been broken, because they realize that they can't win, which was obvious from the very beginning, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Well, that's when the armed forces of Ukraine will collapse, and Kharkov, Odessa, Nikolaev, the whole east and south of the country is going to fall into the Russians' lap with remarkable speed. It's just this period where we're just grinding away. And the clues from the propagandists and from different people sort of like point to the fact that everybody kind of like senses that this is about to happen. Now, when is the about to happen bit going to be? Is it going to be today? Is it going to be tomorrow, next week? I don't know. I don't think anybody can tell you. And in fact, nobody will really know until it happens. It's one of those events that is completely random. But you can say realistically that within the next, by the end of June, it will definitely happen. The sudden implosion of the Eastern Ukrainian army, definitely by the end of June. And this whole thing will be over, definitely over, by September. The 30th of September, it's going to be over. Assuming, of course, that no other major power gets involved in this fight, which I don't think is going to happen. I think that Poland will take that western chunk that I've been talking about since forever, because they lust after Galicia, and they lust after Lviv. And like I have said multiple times before, for weeks, going on months now, Western Ukraine will become Poland's Vietnam. That's where all the extremist Ukrainian nationalists will focus on. They will fight the Poles. It'll be a nightmare for the Poles. That's what I'm thinking at this time. But that's not important. That's for the future. For right now, I think that everybody recognizes that the Russians are winning, and they are going to continue to win until this is all over, and they will take their bit of Ukraine, their bit, huge chunks of it. Now you're going to take all of the south and all of the east, which is the industrial base of Ukraine and the agricultural base of Ukraine. This is the richest soil in Ukraine is in the south and the east. Okay, the most productive region of the country is the south and the east, agriculturally speaking. And so, the cream of Ukraine is going to be under Russian control, and they are going to annex it. There aren't going to be independent republics. For the time being, legally, there is the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, but in short order, they will be folded into the Russian Federation, and they will become a part of Russia. And that's that. That's the future. That is inevitable. And so we have to step back and see where things are going to go. One of the the commentators on the previous video asked me, where will the Eye of Sauron focus on next? The Eye of Sauron, in her lovely metaphor, being, of course, the American attention. And that's something that I've been thinking about myself quite a bit. I've been wondering if they're going to focus on the monkeypox nonsense, because it's a non-issue. It's a non-issue. Less than 100 people outside of Africa have this disease, and the way it's passed is very clear and very well known, and it's relatively easy to cure. It's a nothing burger, literally, because everywhere in the world there are these exotic tropical diseases that escape South America or Africa or Asia and spread out around the world a little bit, but less than 100, less than 1,000 cases around the world. It means nothing. I mean, think of it in terms of the size of the population of the rest of the world. It means nothing. But they're hyping up this monkeypox because, number one, of course, it's very spectacular with those welts on people's limbs and such. Really disgusting. Kind of creepy. And so, of course, it's hypnotic, right? I mean, it plays very well to the news organizations, right? Okay, so there's that possibility. And the other possibility is China, Taiwan, having a war there, having a repeat of the whole Ukrainian thing, goading the Taiwanese into having a war with China, just as Ukraine goaded Russia into this conflict that we're having, right? Ukraine too. I don't know what's going to happen in that regard, but what I do know is the following. There is an election coming up in the United States in November. And at this point, the Democrats are desperate to figure out a way to not lose that election. And they want anything that will help their electoral chances. The Ukraine war is obviously a bust because it'll be over by November and the Russians will have won. And the Biden administration can't afford a humiliation like that after having put so many chips on the Ukrainian bet. And the bet to go sour, no, they can't afford it. So Andrei Martyanov was pointing out in a video that he released that Lloyd Austin said yesterday, the 23rd of May, he said that the Ukrainians are going to have to figure out what to do moving forward, which is news to everybody because over the last year, the Ukrainians have been doing what Washington wanted. And now Washington is saying, well, you guys, you Ukrainians, you figure it out. You know what's best for you. What? Come on, man. Oh, Jesus. So Andrei was of the opinion that this was a signal that the Americans are cutting loose Ukraine. And I fully agree. There are other data points that pretty much point in the same direction, that the Americans are cutting the Ukrainians loose. Some people are talking about, Harpoon missiles, these anti-ship missiles that the United States is going to send to Ukraine. They're never going to get sent. Or if they are sent, they'll be destroyed by the Russians, right? And even if they arrive to the hands of the Ukrainians don't know how to operate them because those are sophisticated systems. It's not, lickety-split and start shooting stuff. No, you have to train to use them, okay? So, it's never going to happen. I mean, it's just talk. It's just all talk. It's all bullshit at this point. And everything that's going on in the West right now is figuring out a way to disengage from this Ukrainian mess because everybody in the West understands that the whole thing is lost. And here we come to the problem, stepping back macro, looking at things from a wider perspective. You see, it's not just the November election. You see, this whole op to destroy Russia has been a complete and utter disaster for the Americans. Because they fought this on three levels, on the social level, on the economic level, and on the military level. Now, the military level is quite obviously, they egged on the Ukrainians to goad the Russians. They basically encouraged them to set up their army in the east to invade the Donbass, and that was the excuse that the Russians needed, to go in and invade Ukraine in turn, to beat them to the punch. And it wasn't just an excuse. I mean, if you, as a sovereign nation, see your opposing number assembling 100,000 combat troops right on your border, it scares the shit out of you. And so, of course, the Russians were going to respond to that grotesque provocation. And, of course, it was going to be the trigger for the war. Never forget, it was those Ukrainian soldiers in the Donbass who were preparing to take over Lugansk and Donetsk, that was the proximate trigger of the war. That was the real reason. That was it. Because they were about to invade and potentially invade Russian sovereign territory. And the Kremlin decided, we're going to move first. We're going to beat them to the punch. That's what happened. And we don't yet have the proof of all of this, but we can infer that this is true because of all those soldiers in the east. In Mariupol, in the Donbass, why were all those, tens of thousands of troops there? Close to 100,000 troops altogether. Why were they there in that little corner of the whole country? Because they were going to do this invasion, okay? After the war, in a few months' time, we'll get all kinds of satellite pictures and all kinds of intelligence that will prove that right before February 24th, that's what was about to happen. And that was set up by the Americans. The Americans egged on the Ukrainians to poke them. On the economic front, the Americans declared total war with all of these sanctions, cutting off Russia from SWIFT, the gas thing, killing all kinds of possibility of even communication, okay? They tried to destroy the Russian economy. Joe Biden said it himself. He joked that the whole point was to turn the ruble into rubble. It didn't work so well now, did it? Just like the war didn't work out so well. And on the social front, this weird and rampant Russophobia that was turned on among the Western population. It was grotesque, to tell you the truth. And for me, it was deeply disappointing. Deeply disappointing to realize that all this bullshit talk about tolerance and, never ascribe collective guilt, everybody is responsible for their own actions. All this enlightenment talk is all so much bullshit. The West doesn't believe any of it. They act like a fucking mob. I think that's the thing that bothers me the most. To realize that the Westerners, the people in the West, they're all sheep. They're all a mob waiting to get a pitchfork and some tiki torches to go and march on whoever is the next group that they hate. Today it was the Russians. Tomorrow might be you. Okay, so. For me, it was deeply disappointing. I want no part of that bullshit anymore, But anyway, that's a personal issue that I don't want to discuss right now in this video. What I want to discuss is that on these three levels, the United States and its little European chihuahuas did their absolute best to destroy Russia, and they failed. And I am going to tell you when I think that they realized that they had failed on all three fronts. When they tried to recapture Snake Island for the 9th of May. Because that was clearly an effort to humiliate the Russians on Victory Day. Which, by the way, Victory Day should be a day of celebration for all the peoples, the free peoples of the West as well as the Russians. Aren't, the Nazis like the worst thing ever? Isn't Hitler like demon incarnate? Shouldn't you be celebrating the day that the demon was destroyed and the evil empire eliminated? And the West doesn't celebrate it. And they wanted to humiliate the Russians on this day. Anyway, the point is that they tried to do that, and they did this stupid operation on Snake Island, which was militarily insignificant. And from what I understand, the Ukrainian armed forces lost a bunch of helicopters, a bunch of planes, a bunch of boats, and 60 men. 60 men for a PR stunt. Because Snake Island is militarily insignificant. And it's a little island in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's not in front of Odessa, whatever you might have heard. If you actually look at the map, you realize it's closer to Romania. It's literally a spit of land in the middle of nowhere. And it doesn't control anything. It doesn't do anything. It's just, somebody should actually build a resort on it. I don't know if it has any beaches, but, it's nothing. But that's what they did. And I think that was the moment when the West realized, this is over. I obviously don't have access to the documentation or the testimony of people, but I get a sense that was the moment when the West realized, holy shit, we're going to lose this sucker. And how do we get out of this? And so It's been that. This whole process since May 9th has been for the West trying to extricate itself. And they've been doing it slowly, just trying to pull back, you know? And I think that in the long term, not long term, into just the next few weeks, you're going to see a lot more of this extraction. I said long term because at the pace we're going, you know, this pace that kills, that's where we're at, really. You know, the days are like weeks, weeks are like years, you know, but in the short term, in the next 2-3 weeks, really, the Americans, the Europeans are going to pull out, and you're going to see more and more people dropping the Ukrainian flag from their Twitter handle. That's when you know. Notice it, okay? Pay attention to all those guys on Twitter that have their little Ukrainian flag. Notice how they slowly start taking it off, and replacing it with something else. But slowly, that little flag is going to get eliminated. And the way the polls are trying to, just a little bit, just a tip, just to see how it feels. They're just sliding it in ever so gently, right? Because they want that peace that I've mentioned before, Galicia. Yeah, it's over, okay? And the Americans in particular, they want to focus on the November election, and they want a clear win because they can't win the economy because the economy is tanking. And here's the other thing that must drive them a little bit nuts. Militarily, the Russians could take them on. And economically, the thing that America is supposed to be so good at, the economy, right? The financial and economic might of the United States, the Russians just shrugged it off. It didn't really affect them. It didn't. And certainly it hurt the Europeans. Yeah. And it certainly is going to be affecting the Americans, not now, in the fall, when there's a shortage of food. That's when it's really going to affect the Americans. That's when American food prices are going to skyrocket. That's when people in the United States are going to start getting outraged over the fact that these big industrial food companies are exporting American food to foreign countries because they pay more. And people in the United States are going to be outraged. And you're going to see that happen. I mean, that's a fearless prediction. A lot of these big companies that own all this farmland, like Bill Gates's, outfit, and a lot of others, they're going to start exporting American food because they pay higher prices, and Americans are going to be outraged. And you're going to see it happening. A whole shit show is going to go on in the United States. But anyway, I just wanted to take this opportunity to sort of like try to see the different layers of what's going on at different distances insofar as time. And bottom line, the war's over. The war in Ukraine is over, okay? And there's no turning back. And NATO is not going to get involved. Nobody's going to come in and save Zelensky's bacon. It's over. And everybody has made up their minds in the West that they want no more part of this. They are all trying to extricate themselves from this disaster, which has been a disaster militarily, economically, and to a certain extent socially. Because a lot of people are like me, have been severely demoralized by what has happened and how all of the liberal Enlightenment values were so much window dressing. It's been a shock to a lot of people. Okay, so that's the short term. It's over. Okay, medium term, we got to figure out if these crazies in Washington are going to latch on to monkeypox or they're going to latch on to Taiwan. At this time, I think they're going to latch on to monkeypox for a simple reason. Monkeypox don't hit back. See? So I think that they're going to start ramping up the hysteria on monkeypox. Even, as I said before, it is a trivial malady. It's trivial. But they're going to need some crisis. They need to scare the sheep into voting Democrat. And fighting a war with Taiwan has too many variables. Fighting with the Russians via the Ukrainian proxy didn't work out now, did it? And so monkeypox it is. And a final note. Before I end this video. See, the Americans knew from the get-go that egging on Ukraine into this war was going to be worse for the Ukrainians. It might weaken the Russians, it might not, as it didn't, as this has shown that it did not weaken the Russians. On the contrary, it's made them stronger. It's also made them a lot more self-confident as to what they can do. And that is a lot. That matters. Okay. But see, from the get-go, Washington, the West, they knew that Ukraine could never beat the Russians. They knew that Ukraine was going to be a living, breathing sacrifice. A sacrifice on the altar of American hegemony and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party's electoral fortunes. The tens of thousands of brave, brave Ukrainian soldiers who have died in this conflict died so that Joe Biden could have more representatives in the House of Representatives and more senators in the Senate. They died for nothing, and the worst part is that the people in Washington knew that they would be dying for nothing. If I were Ukrainian, I wouldn't be upset with the Russians. I wouldn't be upset with the Poles or even the Europeans. I'd be upset with the Americans. The Americans caused this. Deliberately, knowingly, knowing that the Ukrainians could never win. If I were the father of a Ukrainian soldier, frankly, I would take matters into my own hands.